She is completely out of control, Mom. She just carried the baby out into the storm. The heavy electronic deadbolt clicked into place. I stood on the snowy porch in nothing but thin socks and a cotton postpartum robe. On the other side of the glass, my husband, Patrick, held his phone to his ear. Brittany, his marketing assistant, stood right behind his shoulder. At my feet rested an infant car seat. My daughter, Nora, was inside. She was exactly 3 months old. The wind drove sharp beads of ice directly into my eyelids. I reached down, and the plastic handle of the car seat was already cold enough to burn my palm. A thin, broken cry came from underneath the canvas canopy. Nora was freezing. My name is Jessica. At 36 years old, and after 8 years of marriage, I honestly believed that avoiding conflict was the best way to keep my family safe. I was wrong. The man standing on the other side of the door did not look angry. He looked entirely peaceful. I did not waste time pounding on the reinforced glass. I stripped off my robe, draped it over the car seat to block the wind, and lifted Nora. The distance to the guest house across the property was only 40 yards, but the snow had already piled up on the stone path. I ran. My right foot slipped on a patch of black ice, and my knee slammed into the freezing ground, but I kept my arm locked straight. The car seat never touched the snow. When I reached the guest house, the brass wind chime beside the door struck my shoulder. Above the frame, a tiny red light blinked on my mother-in-law's security camera. I hit the heavy oak door with my bare fist. "Barbara," I yelled. The door swung open a moment later, and Barbara stood there in her slippers, staring at the snow covering my bare shoulders. She pulled us inside immediately and locked the heavy door behind me. The warmth of the living room hit my face like a physical blow. "Patrick just called me," Barbara said. Her voice trembled. "He said you had a breakdown. He said you took the baby outside." I did not argue with her, nor did I scream that her son was lying. I set the car seat gently on the rug and pulled back my robe. Nora was breathing rapidly, and her tiny cheeks were flushed bright red. "I need a blanket," I said, keeping my tone perfectly even. "And I need your phone to call 911. Barbara stared at me. She clearly expected a hysterical woman, but she saw a mother prioritizing her child instead. She handed me the phone without another word. The emergency operator asked for our address and the nature of the crisis. I provided our Lake Minnetonka location, stating that my infant had been exposed to severe cold and that my husband had locked us out of the main house. The operator told me to monitor Nora's breathing. I sat on the floor, counting the rise and fall of my baby's chest, focusing entirely on that rhythm. 15 minutes later, the flashing lights of an ambulance and a police cruiser cut through the storm. I walked out carrying Nora, wrapped safely in a thick wool blanket. A police officer approached us, his body camera glowing softly in the dark. Patrick stood on the main porch, wearing a clean, dry sweater. He spoke to the other officer in a low, soothing voice, explaining that I had been suffering from severe sleep deprivation and had wandered out into the blizzard. Brittany stepped forward to introduce herself as a coworker who had merely stopped by to drop off files, claiming she witnessed the entire episode. The officers looked at me, clearly waiting for an explanation. I looked at the footprints in the snow, the diaper bag Patrick had thrown out beside us, and the smart lock on the door. I knew exactly what my husband was doing. The man I married wanted me to look unstable, and he was waiting for me to yell. I turned my back to him and stepped into the ambulance. The emergency room at the hospital was blindingly bright. The attending doctor examined Nora thoroughly, eventually confirming she had mild cold exposure but showed no signs of lasting damage. She was safe, sleeping peacefully in a warmed bassinet. I sat in a plastic chair beside her, wearing hospital scrubs someone had handed me. A nurse walked in and gave me my phone, mentioning that an officer had retrieved it from the house. The screen lit up with a text message from Patrick. It read, "By morning, everyone will know what kind of mother you are." I stared at the words. A new notification dropped down from the top of the screen. It was an automated email from a local family law firm, and the subject line indicated an emergency filing. I opened the message and tapped the attached document. The bold letters at the top spelled out "Emergency Petition Regarding Infant Safety." I scrolled to the first page. The opening line sat alone at the top of the screen. My wife carried our 3-month-old daughter into a blizzard during a postpartum episode. Maya Chen walked into my hospital room just after sunrise, setting a cardboard tray of coffee in a thick leather folder on the sterile plastic table. My attorney did not offer empty sympathy or ask how I was feeling. She pulled up a chair, opened the folder, and looked directly at me. Do not delete any text messages, Maya said, her voice quiet but absolute. Do not post anything online, and do not contact Patrick under any circumstances. I nodded, wrapping my hands around a paper cup of coffee just to feel the heat. Maya was already up to speed because our crisis had not actually started in the snow, it had started the previous afternoon. Just 24 hours ago, Naomi Brooks, a compliance officer at my bank, had called to verify a massive commercial mortgage Patrick was attempting to finalize. He was trying to leverage our Lake Minnetonka estate to save his failing chain of wellness centers. He planned to use a limited power of attorney I had signed months ago, back when I was heavily pregnant and trusting him to handle routine paperwork. But the estate was not his to leverage. I bought the mansion with my own inheritance years before Patrick and I ever got married, and the title remained exclusively in my name. The moment Naomi told me about the loan, I called Maya. We drafted a formal revocation of his authority, filed it immediately, and sent copies to the bank, the title company, and Patrick. Maya's phone buzzed on the hospital table, pulling me back to the present. She checked the screen, tapped the speaker button, and set it down. Naomi, go ahead, Maya said. The compliance officer's voice came through the small speaker, crisp and professional. Patrick just left the branch. He arrived for the closing appointment with a young woman he introduced as his marketing assistant, Brittany. He fully intended to sign the mortgage documents. And you informed him? Maya asked. I told him the limited power of attorney was revoked yesterday, Naomi replied. He tried to argue that as your husband, he had marital rights to the property. I informed him that marriage does not alter a title and it certainly does not resurrect a dead legal document. The estate is entirely yours. His assistant looked completely blindsided when she realized he did not actually own the house. The tension that had been crushing my chest finally eased. I let out a long breath, realizing my home was safe. Patrick could not take the roof over Nora's head. Thank you, Naomi, Maya said, and ended the call. She turned to me, but her expression had not softened. The house is secure. Your daughter is not safe from his story yet. Maya turned her laptop toward me and opened an attachment from the emergency custody petition Patrick had filed overnight. It was a video file. She pressed play. The sound of my own voice filled the quiet hospital room, ragged and echoing. I was screaming at Patrick to give me my baby. The camera angle showed the nursery, capturing me with tears streaming down my face, looking completely unhinged. The footage abruptly skipped forward, entirely omitting the part where Patrick threatened to take Nora away from me forever. Instead, the edited video showed me grabbing the infant car seat and storming toward the heavy oak door leading outside. To anyone watching, it looked exactly like I had lost my mind and chosen to carry my 3-month-old daughter into a blizzard. The clip lasted exactly 4 minutes, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen because it looked entirely real. My phone vibrated on the table. The screen displayed a call from Barbara. I answered, putting her on speaker so Maya could hear. Jessica, my mother-in-law said, her voice tight and hesitant. Patrick just sent a video to the family group chat. He sent it to his lawyer, too. Are you absolutely sure you remember last night clearly? The strategy clicked into place. Patrick was not just lying to a judge. He was poisoning the well, planting seeds of doubt among the people closest to us, trying to make me question my own memory of surviving the night. I remember everything, Barbara, I said, keeping my tone perfectly level before disconnecting the call. Maya did not say a word about the phone call. She was busy scrolling through the legal documents Patrick had submitted to the court. She stopped at the sworn affidavit he had signed to justify the emergency custody order. Look at this, Maya said, pointing to a specific paragraph. Patrick swore under penalty of perjury that he had no idea you revoked his financial access until the bank turned him away this morning. He is claiming his actions last night were purely about protecting Nora from your mental state. She switched tabs on her browser, opening the secure email tracking log from her law firm. But we sent the revocation notice to his personal email yesterday afternoon, Maya said, tracing her finger across the screen to a specific timestamp. I leaned in and read the digital receipt. Patrick opened the revocation document at exactly 6:12 in the evening. He knew he had lost the house more than an hour before he put our baby in the snow. Maya played the 4-minute video again on her laptop, the volume low but still loud enough to make my stomach turn. She paused the clip every few seconds, asking me to describe exactly what happened in the room right before I spoke. I listened to my own voice cracking. The woman on the screen sounded completely broken. I wanted to look away, but I forced myself to watch. I did not tell my attorney that the video was fake, because the tears were real. That was me, I told Maya. That was me right after he took my baby out of my arms and told me I would never see her again. Maya closed the laptop and nodded. She understood that we did not need to deny my panic. We just needed to prove what caused it. Later that afternoon, sitting in Maya's downtown office, a digital forensics specialist named Daniel joined us to secure the files. He did not promise any immediate miracles. He simply opened the video properties and pointed to a block of text on his screen. The clip appeared seamless to the naked eye, but the internal data told a completely different story. The file had been exported and saved almost a full hour after the ambulance took Nora away. Someone had named the file "Full Nursery Incident." The words hit me like a physical blow. That was the exact phrase Brittany had used when speaking to the police officer on our snowy driveway. She had called herself a witness to the full incident. We needed an unedited source to prove the manipulation. Maya put her desk phone on speaker and dialed Barbara. The security camera on the guest house pointed directly at our service entrance, making it the only independent witness to the blizzard. Barbara answered after the fourth ring. Her voice sounded thin and exhausted. When Maya asked about the camera, Barbara confirmed it was mounted on the porch, but her tone immediately shifted. She claimed the battery always ran low in the cold weather and she had not bothered to check the feed. Maya asked for the login credentials so Daniel could verify the system status. Silence stretched across the line. We could hear the faint ticking of a clock in the background. Finally, my mother-in-law spoke. "He is still my son." I leaned forward, resting my hands flat on the desk. "And Nora is still your granddaughter." Barbara hung up the phone. We did not wait for her to change her mind. Using the timeline from my emergency call, the hospital admission records, and the police body camera footage, Maya filed for an immediate order for protection. A judge reviewed the timeline and granted the temporary request just before the courthouse closed for the day. Patrick was legally required to vacate the estate immediately. 2 police officers escorted me back to Lake Minnetonka that evening to ensure the property was empty. The silence inside the massive house felt entirely wrong. I walked up the hardwood stairs, holding Nora tightly against my chest, while the officers checked the rooms. The nursery was spotless. Someone had wiped it clean of any physical evidence, and the indoor security cameras were all completely reset to factory default. When I walked into the master bedroom, a single silver hoop earring sat resting on my nightstand. It was not mine. I left the bedroom and moved into the home office to gather Nora's medical documents from the filing cabinet. The room smelled faintly of Patrick's cologne. As I reached for a folder, a torn corner of yellow paper caught my eye. It was wedged awkwardly underneath the printer tray, half hidden in the shadows. I pulled the paper free and turned it over. It was a piece of stationery, covered in hurried notes and specific timestamps. 6:10. Bank confirmation. 7:20. Call Barbara first. Keep your voice low. I tried to stop her. She carried Nora outside herself. My breath caught in my throat. The sentences matched Patrick's sworn affidavit perfectly, echoing the exact words he had spoken to the police. But the handwriting did not belong to my husband. The slanted letters and sharp, aggressive loops were entirely different. I had seen that exact handwriting on dozens of marketing folders left around the house over the past year. The notes belonged to Brittany. They did not just react to a fight that got out of hand. They had drafted a script, rehearsed their lines, and planned the entire narrative before the storm even started. I carried that torn piece of yellow paper straight to Maya the next morning. My attorney did not look surprised when she read the rehearsed lines. She simply added the scrap to a growing pile of evidence on her desk, right next to a thick stack of bank statements. Through the legal discovery of our joint accounts, the truth about my husband finally had a shape. A forensic accountant had spent the night mapping Patrick's cash flow. The wellness centers were not just struggling, they were entirely underwater. To keep the doors open, Patrick had quietly borrowed massive amounts of money from his sister and from Barbara, convincing his family it was a guaranteed expansion investment. The mortgage he tried to take out on my house was never meant to improve the business. He needed that cash to buy out angry outside investors and pay back his relatives before they realized their life savings were completely gone. The phone on Maya's desk rang loudly. She tapped the speaker button, signaling me to stay perfectly quiet. Patrick's sister spoke first, her voice thick with panic. She begged me to sign a smaller loan agreement, just enough to cover the money their parents had given him. Before I could even process the desperation in her tone, Patrick cut in. "We can handle this privately," my husband said. His voice was smooth and terrifyingly calm. "If you sign the authorization by Friday, I will ask my lawyer to reconsider the emergency custody filing. We can put all of this behind us." The threat hung in the air. He was explicitly holding my daughter hostage for real estate. Maya ended the call without saying a word, documenting the blatant coercion. That afternoon, Barbara came to the Lake Minnetonka house to pack a suitcase of clothes for her son. The temporary protection order barred Patrick from stepping foot on the property, so his mother had to cross the threshold instead. She stood in the grand entryway, her eyes fixed on Nora sleeping in my arms. The older woman did not reach out to hold her granddaughter. I realized then that my mother-in-law's refusal to check the security camera was not just about maternal loyalty. She was terrified of losing her retirement money. If Patrick went down, her entire financial future went down with him. I watched her zip the suitcase and walk out the front door, offering absolutely no apologies. I drove back to the city to meet with Daniel. The digital forensics specialist had legally extracted the corporate communication logs from the shared company server. He turned his monitor toward me, pointing to a messaging thread between Patrick and his marketing assistant. The first message from my husband was sent 2 days before the storm. It read, "Once the loan funds, she will have nowhere left to fight from." The second message was sent on the night of the blizzard, exactly 12 minutes before the police arrived. It read, "Cut everything before she starts screaming." I stared at the screen, my hands resting flat on the wooden desk. The words proved premeditation, but Maya shook her head. A defense attorney could argue those texts were taken out of context. We still needed a perfect link. My lawyer kept digging through the corporate server files, opening an archive of Patrick's email drafts. She stopped moving her mouse and leaned closer to the screen. "He did not just plan to blame you," Maya said softly. She clicked on an email Patrick had written to his corporate attorney. It had never been sent, but the timestamp showed it was created the morning after the storm. The document stated that his assistant, Brittany, had secretly edited the nursery video out of intense personal jealousy. Patrick claimed he had no idea the footage was altered until it was too late, painting himself as a victim of 2 unstable women. My husband was never going to leave his wife for Brittany. The man only kept her close because he needed someone to take the fall if the mortgage fraud failed. Maya printed the draft. Taking a picture of the page with my phone, I opened my messaging app and attached the image to a new text. I addressed it directly to Brittany. I typed a single sentence underneath the picture. "He already wrote the story where you go down alone." I hit send. For a long minute, nothing happened. Then, 3 small gray dots appeared at the bottom of the screen. Brittany was typing. I held my breath, waiting for the message to come through. A second later, the dots vanished. The screen went completely blank. Brittany never replied to my message. The 3 typing dots vanished, and a heavy silence settled over my phone for the next few days. By the time I walked into the county courthouse for our temporary protection hearing, that silence felt entirely suffocating. Maya sat across from me at the heavy mahogany defense table, organizing a stack of printed medical records. She leaned close, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. She warned me to keep my answers incredibly short. I wanted to stand up and scream about a decade of financial control, but my attorney shook her head. We needed to focus exclusively on the blizzard and the safety of my baby. The heavy wooden doors swung open, and Patrick walked into the room. My husband wore a tailored charcoal suit, looking every bit the successful healthcare executive. He took his seat beside his lawyer, never once looking in my direction. When the judge called him to the witness stand, Patrick did not yell. He did not sound defensive. He folded his hands in his lap, lowered his chin, and offered a practiced look of pure devastation. He admitted to his relationship with Brittany right away, calling it a terrible moral failure on his part. But he smoothly pivoted, telling the judge that his infidelity had absolutely nothing to do with infant safety. He claimed he was desperately worried about my mental state. He used words like postpartum depression, sleep deprivation, and psychological instability. He sounded like a man mourning the loss of his family, not a man who had engineered it. His lawyer pressed a button on a laptop, and the 4-minute video began to play. My own voice echoed off the wood-paneled walls of the courtroom. The sound was raw and broken, capturing the exact moment I screamed at Patrick to give me my baby. The footage skipped, showing me grabbing the car seat and moving toward the heavy oak door. I watched the judge shift in her leather chair. A court clerk glanced at me, her eyes filled with a horrible mixture of pity and suspicion. The ambient temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I felt my fingernails digging into my own palms, but I kept my face perfectly still. When Maya called me to the stand, the microphone felt cold against my lips. I did not deny the tears on the screen. I looked directly at the judge and admitted the absolute truth. I was exhausted. I had sought medical support for postpartum fatigue weeks before the storm, and I had struggled to sleep. I acknowledged every piece of my vulnerability, refusing to let my husband weaponize it against me. Then, I explained the physical reality of that night. I stated clearly that exhaustion did not make me dangerous. I told the court how I stripped off my own robe to shield the car seat from the wind. I described running across the black ice, calling 911, and demanding a medical evaluation for Nora. Maya handed a folder to the bailiff, submitting the emergency dispatch logs and the hospital discharge papers into evidence. The documents proved my sequence of events matched reality. The judge reviewed the papers and issued her temporary ruling. She maintained the protection order, ensuring Nora would stay with me at the mansion, and demanded Patrick remain off the property. However, she granted him supervised visitation and messaging access through a court-monitored parenting application. The video remained on the official record because we could not yet prove it was fabricated. We had won the morning, but the war was far from over. We stepped out into the crowded corridor. Down the hall, standing near a bank of metal elevators, Patrick had cornered his mother. Maya and I stopped walking, keeping our distance, but the marble walls amplified their voices perfectly. Patrick warned Barbara that releasing any security footage would bankrupt the entire family. He mentioned the fraudulent mortgage and the very real possibility of a prison sentence. He spoke rapidly, assuming his mother would protect him the way she had protected him since childhood. Barbara looked at the man she had raised. She gripped the handle of her purse, her knuckles turning white, and asked him a single question. She wanted to know if he actually put Nora outside. Patrick refused to answer directly. He shifted his weight, blaming me for forcing his hand, muttering something about needing to take control of the situation. Barbara turned her back on him and walked toward the exit, leaving her son standing alone by the elevators. That evening, back at the Lake Minnetonka estate, I stood on my back porch in the freezing air. Through the large picture window of the guest house, I could see Barbara sitting quietly at her dining table. Her laptop glowed brightly in the dark room. A cell phone rested on the table beside it, the screen lighting up with an incoming message. I watched my mother-in-law slowly raise her right hand, holding it suspended over the keyboard, caught between saving her son and saving the truth. The image of my mother-in-law holding her hand suspended over that glowing keyboard haunted my few hours of sleep. I sat in the heavy leather chair across from Maya's desk the following morning, staring at a lukewarm cup of black tea, wondering if blood loyalty had won the night. I did not know if Patrick's threat had worked, or if the truth had finally broken through decades of careful family denial. The heavy glass door of the law firm swung open. Barbara walked into the reception area, moving with a stiff, deliberate posture that immediately caught my attention. She clutched a silver laptop against her chest like a physical shield, her cell phone and a coiled black data cable gripped tightly in her other hand. My breath caught in my throat, and I stood up as Maya stepped out of her office to meet us in the wide corridor. The older woman did not offer a polite morning greeting, nor did she look at the floor in shame. She walked straight into the conference room, set the electronics carefully on the polished mahogany table, and finally met my eyes. "I spent 40 years calling silence peace," Barbara said, her voice completely steady in the quiet room. "I will not call this love." Maya immediately took control of the hardware, plugging the devices into a secure network while dialing Daniel on a conference line. My attorney had actually guided Barbara over the phone late last night, instructing her exactly how to connect the camera directly to the computer and download the raw files without altering a single byte of data. A few clicks later, Maya opened a video thumbnail, and the large monitor mounted on the wall blinked to life. The footage showed the snowy service entrance of my estate, the timestamp reading almost a full hour before my frantic sprint across the ice. The heavy oak door pushed open. Patrick stepped onto the frozen porch, casually carrying the infant car seat, and set it down on the snow-covered wood. He did not look panicked, and he certainly did not look like a man trying to save a child from a dangerous mental health crisis. He simply turned back toward the warm house and tossed my diaper bag out into the dark. Brittany appeared in the doorway a moment later, wrapping her arms around her chest to block the bitter wind. Her voice drifted through the camera's built-in microphone, sharp and terrifyingly clear. "Did you delete the nursery feed?" she asked. My husband reached for the brass handle to pull the door shut, pausing just long enough to answer. "By morning, everyone will believe she took the baby outside." The screen flashed forward, jumping to the motion-activated clip of my desperate run toward the guest house. I watched myself slip on the black ice, my knee hitting the ground hard, while my arms stayed rigidly locked to keep the car seat entirely safe from the physical impact. I heard Barbara's recorded voice questioning my sanity when she finally opened the door, a cruel echo of the lie Patrick had just planted in her mind. Barbara reached across the mahogany table and tapped the screen of her cell phone, opening a standard audio application. "Patrick got an automated security alert when I logged into the cloud last night," she explained softly, keeping her eyes fixed on the blank wall. "He came to the guest house to make me delete the files. I left my phone recording on the kitchen counter." The harsh sound of Patrick's voice filled the conference room. He was demanding access to the laptop, his tone laced with absolute venom and desperation. He told his mother that if the footage survived, he would lose his company, his freedom, and his pristine reputation. Not once during the 5-minute recording did he ask if Nora was safe, or if she was warm, or if she was healthy. He only cared about the commercial real estate and the fraudulent mortgage. Barbara's recorded voice responded with cold precision. She told him the digital copies had already left the property, warning him that her indoor security camera was currently recording his every aggressive move. A heavy thud echoed through the speaker as he backed away and slammed the door behind him. The conference room door opened, and Daniel walked in carrying a secure hard drive. The digital forensics specialist immediately began transferring the files, running a verification protocol to ensure the chain of custody remained perfectly intact. He paused the guest house video on a specific frame, leaning close to the monitor to examine the glowing white numbers in the bottom corner. "This proves exactly what happened outside," Daniel said, tapping a pen against the system clock on the screen. "But it also proves someone manually changed the internal time inside the nursery file." The two separate video sources did not just contradict each other in content. They proved the timeline Patrick submitted to the family court was mathematically impossible. Daniel did not waste a single second celebrating the breakthrough. The digital forensics expert immediately went to work securing the 3 separate video sources. He cataloged the cloud export, the direct laptop download, and the physical camera data, carefully logging the serial numbers and generating cryptographic hashes to ensure absolute chain of custody. Everything had to be airtight. He explained the technical process in simple terms, pointing out that the guest house camera synchronized its internal clock with a secure server every single night. The timestamp on Barbara's footage was completely unalterable. The nursery file, however, was a different story. Daniel pulled up a side-by-side comparison on his large monitor, aligning the guest house video with the smart lock activity log and the official 911 dispatch record. Those 3 independent timelines matched perfectly, down to the exact second. "Look at the nursery video," Daniel said, tapping the second screen. "The internal metadata proves someone manually changed the export time. Patrick submitted a file that places you inside the house, standing in the baby's room, a full 5 minutes after the police dispatch confirms you were already outside calling for an ambulance." The heavy silence in the conference room broke when Maya's desk phone buzzed. My attorney glanced at the caller identification, raised an eyebrow, and pressed the speaker button. A woman's voice came through the line, sounding tight and desperate. It was Brittany. The marketing assistant did not ask to speak to me, and she certainly did not offer an apology. She wanted to talk to Maya, demanding total legal immunity in exchange for her cooperation. "Patrick locked me out of the company network this morning," Brittany said, her breath catching. "His corporate lawyer just sent me a cease and desist letter. Patrick is claiming I went rogue and edited the nursery footage out of intense personal jealousy. He is trying to pin the entire thing on me. My trap had worked perfectly. The draft email I sent her had finally fractured their alliance. I cannot promise you immunity, Brittany," Maya replied, her tone remaining completely neutral. "The prosecutor makes those decisions, but I can promise that hiding evidence will ensure you take the fall exactly the way he planned." Less than 2 hours later, a courier arrived at our office carrying a silver laptop bag. Brittany had surrendered her company-issued computer through her own legal counsel. Daniel took possession of the device, breaking through the password protection and diving straight into the local storage drives. He did not just find the final 4-minute video. He found the entire original editing project, complete with proxy files, thumbnail caches, and a massive timeline of discarded footage. The full recording proved exactly what happened in the nursery. 8 minutes of footage had been systematically sliced out of the final render. Daniel highlighted a section of the timeline where the audio track had been entirely muted, completely erasing the moment my husband threatened to take Nora away from me forever. An automatic backup file, saved right before the final export, contained a stray audio clip of Brittany speaking in the background. "This looks too obvious," her voice echoed from the laptop speakers. The surrendered laptop also contained an encrypted backup of their corporate messaging application. Daniel extracted the complete chat history, throwing the damning text exchange onto the main conference room monitor. Patrick had sent the order clearly. "Cut everything before she starts screaming," Brittany had replied a moment later. "What if they ask for the original?" My husband's response sat right below it, arrogant and absolute. "There will not be one." The chat log ended with a final message from Patrick, instructing his assistant that if anyone discovered the truth, she was to claim she acted alone out of romantic spite. He had never intended to leave his wife. He had only intended to secure a scapegoat. Maya added a new document to the growing pile on her desk. Naomi had just sent over the official bank compliance logs, proving definitively that Patrick had opened the revocation email, downloaded the attached file, and still signed a sworn affidavit claiming he had no idea his authority was gone. My attorney arranged the evidence into 3 neat stacks, representing the 3 massive lies we were going to break in court. I stared at the paperwork, realizing I no longer needed to convince a judge with my tears. The data was going to speak for itself. Daniel suddenly cleared his throat, pulling our attention back to his monitor. He had been digging through the deepest layers of the editing project, recovering fragments of audio that had been manually deleted from the timeline. "Listen to this," the forensics expert said softly. He pressed the spacebar. The hidden audio track played, capturing Patrick's voice just seconds before he picked up the infant car seat to walk out into the blizzard. "Let her panic," my husband said, his tone dripping with cold calculation. "The court will do the rest." I felt my jaw tighten, looking at the glowing screen. "Then let the court hear all of it," I said. The fluorescent lights in the family courtroom hummed with a low, steady vibration. Patrick sat in the witness box, wearing his tailored charcoal suit, looking completely at ease. He raised his right hand, swearing to tell the absolute truth, and proceeded to lay out 3 distinct lies for the official record. My husband stated clearly that I carried our daughter outside during a mental breakdown. He swore the video his assistant provided was the complete, unedited truth. Finally, he claimed he had no prior knowledge of his revoked legal authority before arriving at the bank. His attorney stood up and pressed play on a laptop. The familiar 4-minute video filled the silent room. Once again, my terrified voice echoed off the wood-paneled walls. But this time, I did not stare at the floor or grip the edge of the table. I looked directly at the judge, watching her expression. Maya stood up for her cross-examination. My attorney did not raise her voice or object to the emotional display. She walked slowly toward the witness box, stopping just a few feet away. "Mr. Miller," Maya said, her tone perfectly even. "You confirm, under the penalty of perjury, that this footage represents the entire unbroken event?" "It does," Patrick answered smoothly. Maya walked over to the media cart and tapped a few keys, bringing up a split-screen presentation on the large courtroom monitors. On the left side, the newly submitted guesthouse camera footage began to play, synchronized with a scrolling list of timestamps from our smart lock system. The right side displayed Patrick's edited nursery video. The entire courtroom watched the left screen show my husband stepping onto the freezing porch, placing the infant car seat in the snow, and locking the heavy door behind him. At that exact second, the right screen showed me supposedly standing inside the warm nursery, screaming. The physical impossibility hung in the dry air. A person could not exist in 2 different places at exactly the same time. Patrick shifted his weight, his pristine composure finally showing a microscopic crack. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Brittany walked down the center aisle, accompanied by her own legal counsel. Taking the stand a few minutes later, the marketing assistant kept her eyes fixed firmly on the judge. She confirmed the existence of the hidden editing project Daniel had recovered. Reading her own text messages aloud, Brittany verified Patrick's direct order to cut the footage before I started screaming. She admitted to her role in the fabrication, her voice shaking only once, effectively destroying the second lie. Maya shifted her focus back to my husband, presenting a stack of certified documents from Naomi at the bank. The email read, "Receipts lit up the monitors next." The digital data confirmed. Patrick opened the revocation file, downloaded the attachment, and read the contents a full hour before the blizzard incident. "You knew your authority was terminated," Maya said, holding the bank logs up for the judge to see. "Why did you still attend the closing appointment?" My husband adjusted his tie, his hands trembling slightly against the wooden rail. He claimed he assumed I would change my mind after we had time to talk. "You did not believe you had authority," my attorney replied, her voice ringing through the quiet room. "You believed fear would make her give it back." Maya called me as the final witness. She asked one simple question about what happened the moment the deadbolt clicked. I described my actions in the exact order they occurred: covering Nora with my own robe to block the wind, running across the ice without dropping the seat, calling for emergency medical help, taking my daughter to the hospital to ensure her survival. I let the hospital records and the police timelines speak for my sanity. The judge did not need to deliberate for long. She issued a long-term order for protection and awarded me sole temporary physical custody pending a full evaluation. Patrick lost all unmonitored access to Nora. Furthermore, the court referred the perjury and evidence tampering directly to the proper authorities for separate criminal review. Before the bailiff escorted him out of the room, Patrick turned to look at me. His expression carried the absolute fury of a man who felt betrayed by the woman he had just tried to destroy. Stepping out into the bright hallway, the heavy weight in my chest finally dissolved. I watched the elevator doors close behind my husband, believing the worst of the battle was finally over. Maya's phone vibrated in her hand. She opened a new message from our financial investigator, and her posture immediately stiffened. "The estate was never his only target," she said softly, turning the screen toward me. The attached document detailed a hidden investment account. Patrick had used Nora's social security number to open a custodial fund, secretly funneling massive amounts of corporate debt straight into our infant daughter's name. The financial investigator placed a thick manila folder on Maya's desk, and the contents finally explained my husband's ultimate backup plan. Patrick had not just targeted my real estate. He had used Nora's social security number to open a custodial investment account, moving large sums of failing corporate money through a trust legally meant for our 3-month-old daughter. The paperwork created the illusion of a responsible father building a college fund while secretly funneling his toxic liabilities directly into her name. I stared at the 9-digit identification number printed across the top of the page, feeling a cold knot pull tight in my stomach. My husband had weaponized our baby in every possible direction, turning her identity into a financial shield. Later that same afternoon, Brittany formally accepted the consequences of her blind loyalty. The marketing assistant sat in a small conference room down the hall, signing a sweeping cooperation agreement with the district attorney. The young woman did not get a clean escape because her signature guaranteed strict probation, heavy financial restitution, and the absolute destruction of her professional career. When the meeting concluded, Brittany walked out into the corridor and stopped a few feet from my chair. She looked completely exhausted, her pristine corporate image shattered into pieces. "I thought he chose me," Brittany said, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her trembling hands, but I did not offer her forgiveness, and I certainly did not offer comfort. "He chose a person he thought he could blame," I replied. The collateral damage extended far beyond the courthouse walls, reaching deep into the roots of his own family. 2 days later, Maya arranged a secure conference call with Barbara and Patrick's younger sister. My attorney shared the forensic accounting records directly to their screens, displaying the massive trail of hidden corporate debt. For the first time, his relatives saw the actual numbers. They finally understood that their retirement savings were not lost because I refused to sign a mortgage. The money evaporated because Patrick had conned them long before the blizzard ever happened. A heavy silence stretched across the phone line before his sister finally spoke. Her voice cracked as she offered a quiet, broken apology for demanding my signature on that loan. I accepted her words, but I made no promises to fix their ruined accounts. The responsibility belonged entirely to the man who stole from them. Patrick realized his financial fortress was collapsing, so he attempted one final act of manipulation. His defense attorney sent Maya a formal settlement offer regarding the custody dispute. My husband promised to surrender all long-term parental rights and accept supervised visitation, but only under one specific condition. He wanted me to write a lenient public statement for the family court, minimizing the blizzard incident as a simple marital misunderstanding. "He wants to buy his reputation back with his daughter," Maya said, tapping a silver pen against the printed offer. "This is his last attempt to control the narrative." I picked up the document, tore it precisely in half, and dropped the pieces into the wastebasket. The legal machinery grinded forward over the next several months, slowly dismantling the life we had built. A judge finalized our property settlement during a brief morning hearing, and the Lake Minnetonka mansion remained exclusively mine, fully protected by the original inheritance documents. Patrick was legally assigned the entirety of his corporate debt, along with the massive legal fees stemming from his fraudulent filings. The family court established a rigid parenting plan, suspending his unmonitored access to Nora indefinitely. Faced with an airtight wall of digital forensics and banking records, my former husband finally stopped fighting. He accepted a comprehensive plea agreement covering the perjury, the evidence tampering, and the financial fraud. The deal carried a mandatory state prison sentence, followed by years of supervised probation and mandatory behavioral treatment. A week before the final sentencing hearing, a thick envelope arrived in my mailbox from the prosecutor's office. The enclosed letter formally invited me to submit a victim impact statement. The presiding judge needed to understand exactly how Patrick's actions had affected my life before she slammed the gavel down for the last time. I sat at my kitchen island late that night, staring at a blank sheet of heavy white paper. A cup of black tea turned cold beside my hand. I thought about the house, the stolen money, and the terrifying 4-minute video. But none of those things represented the true depth of his betrayal. Picking up a black pen, I leaned forward and wrote the first line. The worst thing Patrick took from me was not the house. It was the belief that I had to sound calm before anyone would believe I was telling the truth. I finished writing the letter without shedding a single tear, sealed the heavy paper in a linen envelope, and handed it to the prosecuting attorney the following morning. The sentencing hearing moved with cold, administrative efficiency. The presiding judge read my statement into the official court record, her voice carrying across the quiet room. I did not demand a specific number of years behind bars, nor did I ask for vengeance. My letter simply asked the court to consider the premeditation, the manipulation of a 3-month-old infant, and the deliberate destruction of digital evidence. Justice arrived in the form of a 3-year prison sentence. The plea agreement also mandated a strict probationary period, heavy financial restitution, and mandatory domestic violence intervention. The court took one final step, legally stripping my former husband of any right to use our daughter's name or image for public sympathy, media campaigns, or financial gain. His access to Nora would remain severely restricted, completely dependent on future psychological evaluations and strict court orders. Patrick stood up from the defense table. His pristine charcoal suit looked suddenly too large for his frame, and the arrogant posture he had maintained for months finally collapsed. As a uniformed deputy stepped forward with a pair of heavy steel cuffs, the man who had controlled my life for nearly a decade turned to look at me one last time. "You took everything from me," Patrick whispered, his voice trembling with genuine disbelief. I met his gaze, feeling absolutely nothing at all. "No. I stopped letting you take everything from us." Brittany received her own finalized judgment later that afternoon. The court handed the former marketing assistant a suspended sentence with severe probationary terms, demanding full financial restitution. A permanent protective order forbade any contact with my family. She walked out of the heavy double doors, a ruined professional, staring at the marble floor. We did not speak, and we certainly did not become friends. Her cooperation had merely reduced her punishment, but it did not erase her choices. Winter slowly surrendered to an early spring, and the thick ice on Lake Minnetonka finally began to thaw. I refused to sell the estate, deciding not to let terrible memories dictate my address. Instead, I hired a contractor to remove the heavy oak door at the service entrance. We replaced it with a reinforced glass frame and a smart lock linked exclusively to my personal phone. The guest house underwent a different kind of transformation. Working quietly with a local domestic support network, I opened the small building as a temporary, discreet sanctuary for new mothers needing immediate safety. It was not a massive charitable foundation, but simply a warm room with a locked door, offered to women who needed exactly what I had needed that night. Healing a fractured family required much tighter boundaries. Barbara spent the next several months in intensive therapy, learning to dismantle the enabling habits she had practiced for 40 years. When I finally permitted a supervised visit, my mother-in-law arrived at the main house with careful, measured steps. She did not assume she belonged there, nor did she ask me to call her mom. Barbara stood in the living room, keeping her hands clasped tightly together. "May I hold Nora?" she asked, her voice quiet and respectful. I watched her face, searching for any trace of the woman who had once doubted my sanity. I found only a tired grandmother trying to rebuild a broken bridge. I nodded, gently passing my sleeping daughter into her arms. Late in the season, a final, unexpected snowstorm blanketed the property. I stood in the nursery, holding Nora against my chest while she slept. Outside the window, the wind drove heavy white flakes across the driveway. A familiar metallic sound drifted through the glass. The brass wind chime beside the guest house tapped against the siding. This time, the noise did not signal a desperate escape. I looked down at the security monitor resting on the changing table. Barbara stood on the snowy porch, holding a large cardboard box of diapers, waiting patiently by the reinforced glass door. She did not knock, and she did not try the handle. I looked at the glowing screen, then looked toward the hallway. The estate was completely silent, safe, and entirely mine. The power to decide who crossed that threshold belonged to me, and I did not have to prove my worth to anyone ever again. I walked downstairs and opened the door. When you find yourself standing in the freezing cold of someone else's manipulation, it is incredibly easy to believe that your raw emotions make you weak or unstable. You might think that because you are crying, exhausted, or pushed to your absolute breaking point, the person standing calmly on the other side of the glass has somehow won the argument. But true strength is not about maintaining a flawless, unbothered facade while your life is being actively dismantled. It is about prioritizing what actually matters, securing your reality, and refusing to let a toxic partner edit the footage of your life to fit their own selfish narrative. If you are ever forced into a corner where your sanity, your right to parent, or your financial independence is being weaponized by the very person who promised to protect you, remember that the truth does not need to be screamed to be heard. It just needs to be meticulously documented. Secure your individual assets before you ever think you need to. Keep your financial and legal records perfectly straight, and understand that a quiet, methodical defense will always shatter a loud, orchestrated lie. Never allow a manipulative person to convince the world that your reaction to their abuse is the actual problem. The most powerful thing you can do when someone tries to rewrite your history is to hold firmly to the facts, step away from the emotional bait, and let the undeniable evidence speak entirely for itself. Have you ever had to fight to reclaim your own story after someone you deeply trusted tried to use your most vulnerable moments against you?